today we're going to be talking about education, the fourth industrial revolution, and the progress of learning in the African continent. Now with me is a gentleman by the name of Raghav, who's the CEO of TAG West Africa, and you're one of the guiding spirits of the Lancaster University campus up in Accra, Ghana. Just before we talk a little bit about yourself, I must say straight up, when I came to report on this continent nearly 24 years ago, if you told me that Lancaster University in the UK would have a campus in Africa, I wouldn't have believed it, I'll tell you. How fast are things changing?
I mean, it's quite interesting, you know, nowadays, I think an important part of how you're seeing education evolve is universities are focusing a lot, obviously always have been very focused around bringing students to their campus, whether it's in Australia, in the UK, US. I think with the way education is changing, obviously there's a huge talk about how distributed learning, blended learning, online learning is going to take place. But there are plenty of universities in the UK and Australia who've actually got 50% of their students studying offshore, whether it's in a branch campus partnership in a 2+2, you know, where they're doing a blended partnership with another university. And in this case, you know, Lancaster has actually worked with our group, that's Transnational Academic Group, to set up a base in Ghana. And we're sitting with over about 550 students today, anticipating this campus grows up to about 3,000 in the long run. And so when you look at it, you know, Lancaster's almost got, you know, 40% of their students studying between Ghana, Malaysia, new campus coming up in China, and then they had partnerships in India and Pakistan as well. So I think it's a lot about the universities now going offshore and delivering their curriculum internationally as well.
So just talk a little bit about yourself. I mean, you were educated at what is often called the Eton of India. Just tell us a bit about your background there.
Yeah, sure. I went to, my father actually went to the Doon School, Dehradun. He graduated in 1966. And I think as the family, we had moved to Dubai in 1978. So there's always been an affinity for our family, you know, being based in Dubai. But I think as soon as I was born, I was kind of told that I'd be going to Doon. So I wasn't really given much choice about that option. And I think it's been one of the fantastic experiences of my life. Spent 7 great years there, got a fantastic network of friends from the school. From Doon, I spent some time in Dubai with the family, so studied there for 2 years, and then I transferred to Bentley College, which is just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It was a good small liberal arts school, completely focused on business education, entrepreneurship, and those areas.
What did that teach you, you know, studying in the States? About what did it give you for the job you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, I never thought that I would actually be working in education, and then let alone being in Africa. And so I think the transferable skills of looking at business planning, focusing on strategy development, marketing, understanding who your customer is. So we spent a lot of time in the 2 years that I spent there working on these programs, a lot of case studies. So it's interesting, no, because now, you know, our campus in Ghana has actually become a case study for institutions such as the World Bank, where they're actually now seeing how folks are investing into the tertiary education space in Africa.
Now, Ghana, you've been there 5 years
Yes.
now. What do you think is the value of being there, living the life, and actually breathing it in as well as working?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think we often, growing up, spending some time in India, the family being from India, you know, we always look at emerging markets very similar to the challenges of what India went through in terms of its own development. Infrastructure, electricity problems, roads, you know, having to focus a lot on imported goods rather than a base of things which are produced locally. So we always compare being in Ghana, Nigeria to different cities in India. You know, comparing the beaches in Ghana to the south of India, the roads to Bombay, and some of the electricity problems of what we experience in Delhi. So for us, for me, you know, the family's been in Africa for the last 15 years. And, you know, I think when my family moved to Dubai in the 70s, you know, they also saw Dubai go through the a space where places were run on generators. So it's quite similar to that in some instances as well. But it's quite, it's, you know, it's very, I would say, like, it's motivating. You know, there's so much opportunity. There's always a very big focus on optimism, things getting better. As a group, we're invested. We're looking at building some long-term value in the country as well, and especially with this campus. And so we're excited. I think it's exciting. I always get an opportunity to travel to Dubai on an occasional basis, which I enjoy. The family is based there, and yeah.
And you've been there virtually since the start.
Since day one, yeah.
Day one, when you were there. I mean, a lot of people, there's not that many people alive in this current era who actually started a university from scratch.
Correct.
What was it like?
Yeah, I think this is my second. So, the first one, obviously, I was working with my uncle, who obviously I've joined about almost 11 years ago now. But I think my capacity in working in the campus in Dubai was more about getting it set up. I think the campus in Ghana, obviously, there was a lot more which went into it in terms of the partnership development, looking at the regulatory framework, as well as then going on ground and getting a campus. It's not something I ever dreamed of doing. I never dreamed of actually being in education. If you ask me today how I did in school, I would often meet one of my teachers or matrons, and when I would tell them I'm actually working in the education space, they sometimes laugh at me. So, so I think, it was an exciting time. It was very challenging. I think the opportunity to come and set up a campus from scratch is, we've obviously done quite well in the last 4 to 5 years, but still a lot more room for improvement and growth. And as the group's investing in the tertiary education space, we anticipate opening about 3 to 4 of these campuses across sub-Saharan Africa. So we're calling them centers of excellence. And then around that, we're looking at different programs and courses on the CPD side, vocational, and possibly other areas.
Which other countries are you looking at?
I think the groups, we like to say, I think we've started in the West African region. We're looking at East Africa, and then we're seeing what sort of teaching partnerships we can get in the SADC part, so around South Africa and some of the neighboring countries here.
Well, we're talking about what kind of investment are we talking about here? What size of investment?
Yeah, I think these campuses, we organically invest in them, and I think. So I think we've invested between $25 to $30 million into the Lancaster University Ghana campus. So we're looking at, obviously when we've moved in, we started with renting facilities, so that takes some of the capital expenditure down. But now we're just about on an investment tranche where we've just bought some land, and we're going to be spending about $10 million in our campus development. And then in phase 2 of that development, we anticipate to spend another 10, so about $25 to $30 million.
What's the hunger in this continent, you think, for tertiary education right now?
Yeah, I think, there's a huge conversation always about students. There's always been an aspiration for everyone to get skilled up, to go overseas and study, and to actually be able to get an opportunity where you can get a world-class degree right in the country which you're living in, or neighboring country 40 minutes away. I think it's something which is unheard of in this market, so it's been quite a unique product. It obviously has an interesting story about it, an interesting experience for students to actually get an international blended education in the country, but then working in their own cultural context and looking at entrepreneurship on that aspect as well. So yeah.
And just give us an idea of the growth of the campus, say, from day one. I mean, how many students you start with, and how did that grow?
Sure. I mean, the starting, it always, it's always much smaller, but, we started with about 60 odd students in the Ghana campus, and we're currently sitting at over 550 students. We've just graduated our first class of students. So I think we're well on our way. It's, student numbers obviously relate to some of the factors in the market, as well as the amount of product and programs which we're offering. So, I think we've done well for our size, and, we're going to continue. The new campus is going to allow us to offer new programs, offer a different sort of student experience, a different classroom for what education might look like in 2025, for example.
For a foreign investor, what would you say to them? I mean, how much is your kind of private tertiary institution in its infancy, you think, right now?
I think, when you look at all the private equity funds, DFIs, government institutions who are investing in tertiary education, or in the education space, you'll always notice that there's a much larger investment in the K to 12 sector. And so what we were always talking to a lot of the NGOs and not-for-profit organizations is that there's so much funding going into keeping kids in school that once they graduate from high school, now suddenly they're thinking about what are these students going to be doing once they finish high school, which universities are they going to go to. I think the hunger is there. I think in terms of the market, there will be a much larger movement in the investment in tertiary education space. I think we're trying to define what the centers of excellence are going to look like. What is the model going to look like? Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be blended? Is it going to be a part of it which is online? But then if you're talking, at the Future of Education Summit, which we attended yesterday, there's a conversation about online, but then it comes up to, the infrastructure requirements around it, bandwidth, data, how are students going to consume this data? Is it going to be on a mobile phone, a tab, or a laptop? So it brings up an interesting conversation as well.
And what kind of investors do you look at in this business?
We've obviously, when we started off the campus, it's always been family investment money which has gone into it. So, but otherwise, there are, private equity funds out of West Africa and the Southern African region. There are institutional investors, in the UK and the US who invest into tertiary education as well. I think when they're looking at the space now, it's interesting because they're looking at the operating part of the campus as well, but then there's an interesting real estate component which comes into it, and then you can break that into student housing. You're looking at educational technology and other areas within the spectrum as well.
And in the second half, we're going to talk a lot more about some of the issues around education.
Sure.
But just before we finish off with you and the campus, what would you say be the best thing about this project that you've been doing for the last 5 years? And perhaps tell me first, what's the toughest part of it?
I think the most motivating part about, or most rewarding thing about setting up a business like this is just actually seeing it grow from one team member and now having 100 staff members on campus, 550 students. It's become, for a university, there are a lot of spin-offs into the economy, other people getting jobs around the supporting environment. So I think it's very rewarding. I think one of the most challenging things is to actually get, I think, we spend a lot of time focusing on developing our teams and putting together a team of like-minded individuals to go towards a specific goal has been one of the most challenging. A lot of, folks have not actually, markets like Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, you have tertiary institutions, which have been running for many years. But when you're coming in from a private side of tertiary education, it's a bit more different than being in a conventional government university, the way we do things, the way we optimize our resources, the infrastructure planning. So you don't have people with the exact comparable skills. So we end up spending a lot of time training and developing our staff. And I think we're sitting at quite a comfortable place. Even our own academics, we have to make sure that they're at, the front end of, they're at in the front of developing and teaching in an excellent framework and making sure that they've been able to develop this value which we're trying to give to our students. So, yeah.
Stay tuned for the second half. We're going to be talking about the issues behind education in Africa and also the fourth industrial revolution. I'm Chris Fisher. I'm talking to Raghav Lal. He's the CEO of TAG West Africa and one of the founders of the Lancaster University campus in Ghana. Raghav, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
We mentioned the end of the first half, fourth industrial revolution. There's a lot of talk about it.
Correct.
What's the action on the ground in tertiary education?
I think I think everyone's talking about disruption. When you're looking at our campus development, which we're investing in for the new campus and the site, and the way we're looking at our spaces, the way the library, it's gone are the days where it's just a quiet study area. It's all about group study and engagement with students, with amongst each other, group work. So I think it's quite interesting. I mean, we're focusing around entrepreneurship and enterprise development on our campus as well. So I think everyone's, there's obviously it's early stage of talking about big data, artificial intelligence, what's education going to be looking like in 10, 15 years. And I think, when you're talking about, university institutions such as ourselves as Lancaster, in Ghana, as well as our other partnership with Curtin in Dubai. If you actually go into their campuses now and you actually start seeing what these classrooms look like, everything's recorded seamlessly. So if a student misses class, they can actually go online an hour later and watch what they missed. There's already a big focus around our students to actually work with their lecturers and other students. So I think the students are actually going to be the ones who are going to dictate what education is going to look like and how they want to consume this knowledge, how they want to interact with their peer group, how they want to interact with their faculty, whether they want to go on for a webinar, whether they want to come into class for a face-to-face session, whether they want to be taught on a block, whether they want to be taught by distance. So there's so much, so I think at the end of it, by the end of it, education will look like, a personalized design program of how they want to consume this information.
Well, there's a question. I mean, new technology. How long before people are doing degrees on their phones in Africa?
I think one of the interesting things is if you actually think about how distance learning was designed, it was all first designed with a thought that it would be done on a PC and laptop. And, there's schools now where administrators are teaching content through a mobile phone. We give our MBA students online textbooks. So, I mean, it's already there. I mean, it's already past, laptops are already, in the process of being phased out as well, where everyone's using tabs. So it will be right to your palm. So,
as an investor in private tertiary education, do you ever fear that one day, because of the wonders of the internet, people will just be going their own way and learning their own stuff?
I think, I don't think personally that would happen. I think people who invest in education and going to a good institution, I think a lot of what you learn comes from your peer group. And I think that was something important which we learned at our boarding school in India, the business school which I went to in the US as well. And I just think about, if you even think about, I don't even think lecturers or academics call themselves, they're not that focused, because at the end of the day, they go into the classroom to facilitate a discussion, and the discussion takes place between the peer group. So, you might, yes, there is that human interaction part which I'm talking about, but you could be sitting here where you're interviewing me, sitting in another part of the world, the cameraman somewhere. So, I mean, of course, but I think, there'll always be that personal touch, which I always think should stay in education, and it shouldn't become completely personal, because then you start going into things where, people are just behind a screen, and I don't know if that's what I would want my kids to grow up like. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you need that interaction, don't
absolutely.
you? And also the environment of being with other people, I suppose.
Yeah. But you learn from your peer group, and that's what you saw for me in boarding school, or whether it was in the States. I think you learn from each other more than anything else. So.
And the future of what tertiary educations teach, I mean, that's something else that must be uppermost in your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, we as a business channel would say, why aren't there just courses in entrepreneurism, and leave it there?
No, I mean, it doesn't. There's way more which goes into, the students demand a lot more from academics. I think there's always been an initial frame of, people think about education where the lecturer gets up and lectures, but it's become a flipped classroom where the students are challenging the academics. You can fact check anything which someone's talking about. If you're teaching students about social media, you can't talk about something which was happening in 2015, because some of those businesses don't exist anymore. So it has to be current, it has to be up to date, and that's where I think research-led curriculum, that's where, if your academics are focusing a little bit on research, then at least you know that the students are getting stuff which is current and relevant. You can't be teaching students about the 1999 financial collapse without talking about what's happened in 2008 and then recently in 2013 as well.
And there you mentioned about the students, their attitude. Where would you say the African student of 2017? I mean, what kind of people are we seeing coming up?
These kids are they're confident, they're demanding, they want high quality programs. They know what their family or themselves, what they're paying for the education. So they're demanding. But when you actually see these students stand up, we've had a couple of TEDx talks on our campus, and these kids, one of these students stood up and started his presentation by saying, "I love myself." And thought-provoking. You're just thinking, what is this guy going on about? And so I think, the African students, they're bright. They've all grown up land of opportunity. Families of all, across, whether they're from business backgrounds, parents are working in a, service job. So I think, the future is bright. The kids are really smart. Our students, they normally go abroad for an exchange program, and the students from Ghana and Nigeria are running the show. They're entertaining, they're playing sports, they're debating, so they're right up there. I would put them against competitive to anyone in the world.
What about what private tertiary institutions are teaching in Africa? I mean, myself, I studied traditional English literature,
Correct.
Chaucer, Wordsworth, Shakespeare.
Yeah.
All very interesting,
Yeah.
but it wasn't that much use to me, really, even
Yeah.
in journalism. But
Yeah.
people are saying these days we should be teaching more skills, people how to do things.
Correct.
What do you say?
I think everyone talks about critical thinking. I think a lot of people are talking about transferable skills. People always make comparisons of people who went to the army and now working in the corporate world, and how you can take some of those processes and procedures and use it in the business world. So I think, students, I think 40-50% of students actually end up working in a career outside of what they studied. So I think that's using that as an important base. I think it's about enabling students to think and utilize their skills in a transferable way that they might have not studied in a particular area, but if they know how to apply their mind to it, using technology, doing research about it, and then thinking about how they can solve. So I think now there's a lot of talk of looking at solution-based businesses rather than always the other way around. So I think that's where design thinking is coming into play. We did an interesting project where we were using design thinking to artisans on the road of how they can use technology to scale up their businesses. But you would never think of that. So it's something just to think about.
And looking towards the future now, where do you think the future of private tertiary education is going in Africa?
Yeah, I think we as a group are looking at investing in 4 to 5 of these branch campuses across the subcontinent. We're looking at some centers to support these main branch campuses. So I think when you look at our centers of excellence across the subcontinent, there'll be a great opportunity for all the universities to interact and engage with each other. I think that's where it'll be an interesting thing to seeing students actually travel across the African subcontinent to learn more about how business is done in Uganda and South Africa. Obviously everyone in the world knows how business is done in the UK and US and Australia, but actually it'd be interesting now of how people from around the world can come to Africa and see how things are being done.
And yourself, as an entrepreneur, what sort of a footprint do you want to leave in the business in this continent?
I think, when you're building long-term value, I think when we look back, and as I was saying, when you're looking at these campuses, we didn't really know that we'd be up in Ghana in 2013. We're looking at a campus in Uganda in 2019. We're looking at something in South Africa as well. So I think, having fantastic networks of universities, of excellent professionals working in these institutions, global student base, that would be something pretty nice to look back forward in a few years, yeah.
And what about you as a person? What do you think your working life in Africa has taught you?
I think patience. I think that's one of the...
It's a virtue, by the way.
It's a virtue, yeah. I think, it takes time it takes a lot of time to make people understand what the vision is. You have to keep repeating it, making sure that they understand it, where we're trying to go with it, because sometimes the product of what you're offering is something different. So it's hard sometimes for people to get that. But I think a lot of times people end up losing out is by being impatient and not seeing how things happen and watching how these, you plant a seed and you have to see it grow into a nice plant and tree in the future. So it doesn't happen overnight. So I think, people always tell us that we've moved really fast in Ghana, and I always say, no, we're going slow and steady, because that's the way. You can't disrupt the system too much as well. So, yeah.
And, when you get up in the morning, what's the way you always approach a new day in Accra?
I think, each day brings its own challenges, but I think one of the things about being is just positive and just taking it as it comes, So, yeah.
Well, we wish you very best of luck.
Thank you.
With
Appreciate
the Lancaster University campus in Accra,
Yeah.
Ghana. We've been talking to Raghav Lal, the CEO of TAG West Africa.